Here goes. All right, fantastic. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. On this edition, it's our Make Me Want to Holler, all things the Black people struggle, from Turtle Island to the UK and elsewhere. And on this edition, we welcome a new guest. We are joined tonight by Diallo Kenyatta, who is a longtime racial and social justice activist. He is a co-host to Earn Your Liberation on Black Power Media, where epic, spirited debates often break out with him and co-host and three-time past guest, Dr. Jared Ball. He hosts several other shows, I believe, including a new one on a BPM called Bro Diallo Show. So first off, Diallo, thank you so much for coming on the program. And if I missed anything in that very brief biography, please introduce yourself.
I actually host a local radio program here in the city of Chicago called the Bro Diallo Show. But I have another show on Black Power Media called The Rational Radicals with co-host Skip Coons. So, but other than that, perfect.
I think people who do watch Black Power Media either regularly or irregularly, we know you from Earn Your Liberation, but the new program, I'm very glad that you clarified that. So the new program, the Rational Radical, that started sometime sometime
ago,
this year or sometime late last year.
This year, it's brand new.
Yeah,
it's brand new. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And all right, and let's get into it. So before, so actually, my first question, actually, I wanted to ask you, Mr. Kenyatta, is can you talk to us about Native American solidarity? And what I mean by that is, obviously, Black Power Media and other Black leftist outlets focus on the plight of our people, in the U.S. and we try the best to our abilities to cover what's going on in Africa, the ongoing scramble for Africa, and so forth.
Right.
But seeing as the U.S. is, the U.S. is not just an apartheid regime to Black Americans and our Latino, our Latinx brothers and sisters and non-binary. But, the U.S.'s first original sin, of course, is the ongoing brutal settler colonialism of Native Americans. And I just wanted to ask you and get a brief response. What do you think it's going to take for the plight of Native Americans to get much more urgent solidarity, not just from the Black left, but from all leftists, whether it's eco-socialists, whether it's queer liberationists, whether it's the feminist movement, whether it's the broad workers movement and the Latinx power movement, and those who who fight for the rights of immigrants, both legal or otherwise. So, what do you think it's going to take for the broad U.S. left to show more solidarity towards Native Americans and have it be an urgent topic of discussion, like how it is in Canada, to an extent in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, the first thing it will take, because the Native American population in the United States is an extremely complex population. It is a grouping of, because when you say Native Americans, that's like saying Native Europeans or Native Africans. I mean, they are a diverse group of nations that have diverse language, diverse history, diverse interests, diverse value systems and cultures. What ties them all together is the same thing that ties together the Pan-African community, a common oppressor, being under genocidal oppression, having their lands occupied and their ecosystems destroyed. So a lot of people, one thing that requires real solidarity is to see them in their complexity and to accept the realities of the First Nations. A lot of groups that claim they have solidarity with Native populations kind of really fantasize or glamorize these people as the ancient. As I was growing up, there was this concept that was known once as the noble savage. These people, they're all people one with the land, and they won't even acknowledge Native American people in the modern context, in modern reality. They want to see people who dwell in teepees and wear feather headdresses and hunt buffalo. when these are people who drive cars and have indoor plumbing and want to see their children to go on to achieve and cultivate and sustain their culture, but in a modern context. They don't want to be locked into that past. So a lot of times when people come into when people from majority populations come into oppressed populations, they kind of have this idealized view of people and don't acknowledge them in all their complexity. So from the
Interesting.
outside, I can't really speak for what the natives want or need on behalf of the native community, but as someone who came up, I grew up in Missouri, in the Midwest, on the Missouri-Kansas border, and I had some interactions with the Lakota and the native people around that regions.
Interesting.
Yeah, and when I was in New York City, there were programs and initiatives to bring native students into my university, and I was able to go. We used to go, especially back then in the 90s, the gun laws were very strict. So a lot of times we would go out to Jersey and go to the native nations there, because you could do target practice and archery and things outside of the city limits, and you could use weapons and engage in activities there that were forbidden offside of native nations. So in my interactions and discussions with them, it's kind of curious, because they've, under the decades of occupation of native nations, and then you have a dichotomy. You have the recognized native nations that the federal government acknowledges, and then you
Mm.
have native nations that the government doesn't acknowledge. Some are fighting for acknowledgement, some are indifferent to acknowledgement, but you find a lot of people from, First Nations, especially the ones that have been acknowledged, that have treaty and status within the United States. They have hierarchies within their group. They have elites or tribal elders or leaders that are just as parasitic, exploitative, taking
Like
advantage of their
like the
communities.
Black misleadership class and the Latinx
Exactly.
misleadership
A
class.
lot of racism, anti-Black, anti-immigrant racism. They have a lot of the same cultural contaminations, so a lot of the same shortfalls that have been when a people have been under genocidal occupation, intensive ongoing indoctrination, have their history obfuscated or distorted by the dominant culture, being seduced by the dominant culture to want the material status and to construct the same hierarchy, brought into the colonial slave religions of the oppressor. So it is a very complex community. It is a complex group of nations that are still under direct and ongoing genocidal occupation. And one thing that I think we have to do, if we're going to claim to be in solidarity and in opposition to genocide, oppression, and erasure of the native peoples, is to acknowledge that complexity and engage in that complexity, address the internal contradictions that they have, overcome our own ignorance and distortions. There is a large, and very tragic component of reality of the Black Indians here in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, because every single recognized civilized tribe not only owned slaves, but was an active participant in the slave trade, in capturing escaped slaves, in using slaves as bargaining chips. I'm sure you heard about the Trail of Tears. I mean, the natives that were sent on the Trail of Tears by Andrew Jackson brought along their human property. They enslaved our ancestors, and there's an ongoing dialogue about African people and our native lineage, because where we basically call it Indian blood. We got Indian in our family, but what a lot of Black people with Indian, Native American lineage don't realize is that we got the so-called white blood, red blood, the same way we got the white blood, through rape and ownership and exploitation, not through mutual defense. And that is not a universal thing, because you go to certain parts like the Deep South, the Seminole Indians did not. They resisted colonization, and they formed mutual partnership, as opposed to parting. Many natives fought with the Europeans, and some natives fought against. So it's not
But,
across the board. You have to go nation by
but
nation.
that's but you're talking about the Revolutionary War or the Yeah, the Revolutionary War or the American Civil War.
Both in all
Yeah.
conflicts. Native peoples' history has been erased, but they've been a key factor in all major movements and struggles in the United States since its founding. And again, it's not as black as white. Every single recognized civilized tribe, you have native nations or native communities that fought against the European colonization and settlements. I hate calling it settlement. I just call it invasion and occupation. They didn't settle this land. They disrupted this land. So European disruptors, not settlers. But all again, the recognized the treaty nations all fought on the side of the Confederacy. They all fought to sustain the system of chattel slavery, without exception. They all fought on the side of slavery. There are many native blacks who were owned by, and the history is well documented, red masters. You had white masters and you had red masters. And the red masters, after emancipation, on more than one occasion, literally took tribal council votes to oust the native blacks, the native Africans, the Africans who had native, who were either owned and raised in the plantation system or had mixed lineage between African and native, and they vote to oust them. And so it's, like I said, it's a complex history. And one of the ways to bring the native struggle, the First Nation struggle, to the fore, from my point of view, and to have true solidarity with any type of groups that have had these internal conflicts and these eternal complexities, is to bring them to the fore, and to acknowledge these conflicts, and then we can move forward. But a lot of times when we try to bury this and pretend like it's a big kumbaya and we all love each other and we've always gotten along, I think that creates not only tension within the group, but it also creates fissures that our oppressors can exploit, and creates opportunities for greater division and cultures. But when this is brought to the fore, all the atrocities and conflicts, internal atrocities and conflicts, are acknowledged. The class disparities. You have certain native nations that have become quite wealthy and have fully integrated themselves with the capitalist system of hyper exploitation of workers, hyper exploitation of territories and ecosystems. You have wealthy nations and you have impoverished nations. So the class disparities, the internal racial and ethnic and cultural disparities, that all has to be brought to the front. But I think for as long as we look at native people and we try to lock them into this history of these noble people of the land who have not, who shun modernization, who shun modern technology, and they just want their sweat lodges and they just want their bareback horse riding. To me, it is offensive, it's inaccurate, and it feeds into, even when you claim to fight on behalf of these people, you're fighting for a fantasy. You're fighting for a reality that never existed and doesn't currently exist. So I think the main thing is educating people about the realities of the nature of the oppression and the nature and the various maladaptations that native First Nations have grafted onto in response to ongoing genocidal oppression.
I'll just say a quick response. I was actually quite surprised when I read Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's A People's History of Indigenous America. Well, that's not the accurate title, but that's kind of me paraphrasing the title. But I was quite surprised when reading her book how because I was under the impression when I was learning about Native American history back when I lived in the U.S. that that all of the different nations were much more united on this part of Turtle Island, the United States, when it came to resisting settler colonialism and the expansionist white supremacists. But unfortunately, unfortunately, actually, many Native Americans fell under what all colonized people fall under, which is the whole divide and conquer routine. And
Yeah,
some,
they ran the same hustle. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
they did the same thing. Yeah,
yeah,
it's not true.
and yes, and some did fought on the side of the Confederacy, but from my understanding was some fought on the side of the Confederacy because they knew that Abraham Lincoln, his freeing the slaves still meant that there was going to be a brutal subjugation of Native Americans, which actually did happen during the which actually happened during the American Civil War. But as you said, some of those thorny topics do need to be explored, and I think all oppressed people do have to do have to understand that that we all have to be united in fighting white supremacy and black liber and we
Yeah,
can't.
I could understand strategically if you have an enemy or two enemies and you look at your enemy's enemies, but you know, it was not just because it was a strategic struggle in order to because the Confederates made promises, and like the Confederates didn't just make promises of territory, they made promises of allowing them to keep their human chattel. And
Oh,
they didn't just fighting for territory, they were fighting to maintain their human chattel. And even after the Civil War was resolved to the extent that it was, they still argued for human chattel. So as my wife is very fond of saying, and I agree, you can't cry freedom with your foot on someone else's neck.
yeah, yeah.
I don't care how noble your struggle is. If a key component or a core component of your struggle is the hyper exploitation of another group, then you can't I can't hold solidarity with that.
But it's also important to recognize that that's also just the once that's also just the leadership, and that we shouldn't have a collective how should I say, a collective punishment towards descendants the descendants of Native Americans of today who are also under brutal white
Well, in
supremacy,
reality, there has been no collective.
like our people, like our people are.
Well, in reality, there's been no collective or individual punishment. There's been no reckoning for it. There's been no reparations given. And the racism and discrimination still is present.
Okay. Well,
I mean, it is. I
go
mean,
ahead.
as an African person, it's there, and throughout, and I understand the invaders, the unsettlers, the disruptors, very very deliberate and aggressive efforts to create these divisions. So I don't pretend that this is anything that would have occurred outside of the context of Western genocidal invasion and settler colonialism. Things might have been very different between our peoples, but they are what they are. The history is what it is, and their current contemporary reality is what it is. And if we want to change it for the better, we can't ignore the parts that make us uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, anywho, thank you for that response, and yes, on to the other questions at hand. And now, actually, what's your name on Twitter? Your name on Twitter is the Pan, is the Grinch of Pan-Africanism, right? Or
Yeah, I didn't give myself that name. That's a name that was given to me, and I just embraced it. I don't see myself. I think I'm a bundle of joy. I think I am a ray of light to all. But other people have different opinions, so I just say, hey, if that's what they're gonna call me. So I kind of just, but I didn't name myself that. I just kind of embraced it.
That being said, can you talk to us then about what is Afro-Pessimism? Are you an advocate of it? And explain if the answer is yes, explain why you are, and if the answer is no, explain why you aren't.
I don't consider myself an Afro-pessimist, even though I agree with the basic premise that everybody's against us. Um, but the reason why I'm not a pessimist is because that doesn't make me pessimistic. The fact that everybody hates me because I'm black, everybody hates me because I'm African, everybody's against us. Afro-pessimism is pretty much is following the demonstrated reality to the extent that I do understand it. Is the reality that, or I think Dr. Bobby Wright put it better, is that anti-blackness is the world's only universal ideology. And to say that anti-blackness is the world's only universal ideology is meaning that you can go parts of the globe where there are no significant presence of African people, positive or negative, and people still have a view and a position on African people, or people with the African phenotype, a negative position, a negative view. The proliferation of skin bleaching creams and the proliferation of surgical procedures that will reduce or eliminate one's African features, or features that have been associated with African people or the African or Black phenotype. I agree with that. That is the reality, the reality in the world that we operate in. I also understand that it is a relatively new phenomenon. And on the scale of human existence, the scale of recorded human history, the African phenotype, the African identity, African culture was seen as a goal to be obtained. It was something that was greatly admired and mimicked by many other cultures that later came to deny their origins, or how much they borrowed, stole, or mimicked from our ancestors. But all in all, I don't think pessimism would be a conclusion from the acknowledgement of this reality. As Dr. John Henry Clarke said, with a billion other African people in the world, why do we need or want someone else to love us? So and again, if somebody hates me, I hate you back. I'm not going to bemoan someone's hostility. I don't think we should focus as much on how other people feel about us or think, or their uninformed or racist opinions or conclusions. To me, I focus more on our vulnerability. I think people's attitudes about us and feelings about us are less relevant than our vulnerability to us. If someone has a negative impression of African people or the Black phenotype, but they're in no position, have no power or institutions or weapons that can harm us, that's less relevant to me than someone who pretends to love me and my people, but they have the power, economic, military, cultural influence to harm us. I'd rather focus more on someone that pretends to love us or admire us or honor us and has a potential to harm us than those who have no potential to harm us. So again, I'm more critical than some impoverished, illiterate redneck in Appalachia who hates Black people. Is less relevant to me than some liberal Democrat who's in a position to write and implement and oversee and enforce policy but claims to love Black people or claims to be non-racist. So I think I focus more on the reason I don't tend to pessimism. I focus more on vulnerabilities. I seek to destroy and address the vulnerabilities of African people to hostile forces or predatory forces, no matter where they manifest, as opposed to trying to convince or understand why somebody doesn't like us.
It's interesting what you were saying about how about how no matter where in the world Black people, Afro-descendant Black people, that no matter where in the world Black people are, a minority community, that that following that there's always like there's always this institutional anti-Black racism. It reminds me of of a quote from Colin Mohammed, who I actually did a program on with Troy Moten of Your Old News. And yeah, and putting aside some of his more controversial comments, he said something brilliant. He was talking about how when he went to Mecca, he did not find what Malcolm found, and he said, "I found racism amongst the white Arabs so thick you can cut it with a damn knife. I found ghettos in Mecca, and I found that no matter where I go across the world, you always have white on top and black on the bottom. If it's a Christian country, you'll have white Christian on top and black Christian on the bottom. If it's a Muslim country, you'll find the white Muslim on top, black Muslim on the bottom. If it's a so-called Jew country, you'll find the white Jew on top and the black Jew on the bottom." Right. I've been to capitalist countries and we're victims of white capitalism. That's why you'll find that the white man is the upper class and the black man and woman is the lower class.
But that's not, even if that was universal, whites on tops and black on the bottom, the greatest threat to white people are other white people. There are white people suffering and dying. So if it was a universal fact that every single white person was profiting and benefiting from capitalism, that every single white person who identifies themselves as white was actually on top. I grew up in a housing project in the Midwest, and they built this black housing project literally just adjacent to the city dump. It was a rail yard, a truck yard, and I mean, it's called environmental racism. And on this side, on the one side of the housing project was the inner city black housing where they stacked us on top of each other. And on the other side, you cross the rail yard and you go to the other side of the dump. You've had the poor white neighborhoods, the trailer parks, and I would be in the trailer park was, I mean, many of the trailers didn't even have, at least in the projects, we all had that shitty synthetic carpet and running water. Many of those trailers had dirt floors and no indoor plumbing. And those white people living at the bottom of the bottom still felt superior to the black people. And if you per capita, the poor areas had lower crime rates, greater literacy, and as far as is communicable and chronic disease, the white people were suffering. But many whites will prefer a white hell over a non-white or black heaven. So it's not even that whites are at the top.
That is true.
It's not white. Right. It's not white supremacy. It's white aggression. And you will find that even white people who are not even benefiting from the system of racism and capitalism, those who are suffering, will still embrace and grasp onto it harder than the wealthy whites, the elite whites. So you can say,
but that said, and I completely agree with both your analysis and the late Colin Muhammad's analysis. But then wouldn't the conclusion you draw from is that we should be Afro-pessimist because like you just mentioned, you have that racism. You have that racism amongst those largely white poor, what they call the white working class, who will find solidarity with the upper class crackers who want to continue to brutally subjugate our people, brown, brown Latinos and Latinx people, indigenous Americans. So wouldn't you come to that conclusion of being an Afro-pessimist then?
No, I'm not an Afro-pessimist. I'm supposed to. Can I cuss?
Yeah, go ahead.
I won't cuss. But I'm supposed to give a flying. What do I care? What does this shit got to do with me? Like, seriously, why would that make me pessimistic that the white working class and white poor are gullible enough to think that their lack of pigment, their lack of gluteal muscles, aligns them with their exploiters. You know, I have to tell black people all the time, they don't do this shit because we're black. They don't do this shit to us because we're black. They do it because they're white. That's why I can't be an Afro-pessimist. Ain't nothing wrong with us. There's no reason for us to be pessimistic about blackness. They don't do this because we're black. They do it because they're white. The racist cops don't attack black people because we're black. They attack us because they're white. They didn't invade and colonize Africa because Africa is full of black people. They did it because Europe was full of white people. So if anything, I'm Euro-pessimist. They the ones that got the problem. Our problem is vulnerability to their pathology. That's why I don't say white supremacy. I say white supremacists or white supremacists. I don't say white supremacy or white supremacists. I say white pathology. I say white aggression. I say white hegemony. I'm even willing to grant you white domination. But a supreme individual or a supreme group of people does not have to create such economic, social, academic, political imbalances. If Michael Jordan walked onto a basketball field with a pistol and a hammer and was allowed to shoot and bludgeon every other player, and then he scores 93 points on the court, do we say he's the best basketball player? In fact, it would level the most corrupt. And I've been in the United States to some of the wealthiest, most affluent areas. Here in Chicago on the Gold Coast, I've been to Beverly Hills. I've been to the Upper West Side and to the wealthiest homes in the world in Manhattan. I've been to the suburban gated communities. I've looked at some of the most affluent, some of the apex of Western, this is the top of the Western Empire, some of the people living highest on the hog. And let me tell you something, it looks miserable to me. I'm like, damn, y'all robbed the world and destroyed the planet's ecosystem, and this is the best the fuck y'all could do? I'm supposed to feel bad because I can't be part of this shit? I want to close the income gap. I want to get closer to and integrate with this. Those are just not conclusions I have reached. The white pathology and white aggression, you know, it harms the world. It harms human and non-human animals. And it is something we have to confront and deconstruct and dismantle. But to me, that is something that gives me enthusiasm. I'm glad I'm not a part of it, and I'm privileged to be in a position to confront and challenge it and expose it. But no, there's nothing pessimistic on my side about none of that. But we got to stop pretending like they're doing this. And one more thing I'll add.
Yeah.
Europe. And I talk about this all the time, the myth of white unity. There's this myth that Europeans are so unified and they stick together and we fight amongst ourselves. And that's why we can't get ahead. We crabs in a barrel nonsense, as if we fought 2 world wars against each other. Literally, somebody will be sitting here in the midst that they've already fought 2 global wars and already got nuclear about to go into their third.
But isn't that the sort of divide and conquer? Because obviously, obviously, like a lot of the civil wars that have happened in Africa, but even wars amongst African people, but a lot of that is because of divide and conquer from the white, from the United white supremacists of Europe, North America, Canada, and the United States, and so forth, right? Or,
well, yeah, I mean, I think we give a lot of weight to divide and conquer, because divide and conquer is not just something white folks inflicted on us; it's something they do. I mean, if we're divide and conquer, I mean, the act of conquering someone versus being conquered, it worked both ways. And white folks engage in conquest regardless of whether they're divided or united. I tell Black folks all the time, we all know the racial slurs, especially if you came up in the United States, you know all the racial slurs that white folks have for Black people. They even have secret racial slurs, coded words, urban, inner city, thug. Words that they get to say even now in the popular media that translate to black. And we all know that the horrendous slurs from the N word to calling us monkeys and apes. But I'm like, do you ever sit to consider how many slurs white people have amongst themselves? Do you know how many slurs the average white person from Western Europe has for Irish people? You go ask your white Anglo-Saxon Protestant how many slurs he has for an Irish person or a Polish person or an Italian. You go ask any white Christian how many slurs they have for Jews. In fact, their slurs are so well integrated. We got white slurs. We don't, oh, you Shylock, you shyster. Black people using that. So we act like, oh yeah, if we could get them to stop hating us, if we can get them to do right by us, if we can get them to understand that we are their brother, they've never made peace amongst themselves. We are under the illusion that they all united together and came together and embraced each other. And through that embrace and internal white love and white power, they conquered the world. That is not, this world was not conquered by a unified bunch of white folks. The whole time they were engaged in genocidal conquest of the globe, they were having vicious and brutal internal conflicts. Prior to the Reconstruction and Civil War, the primary victims of lynchings were white people. Europeans did not leave Europe and all of a sudden invent genocide, systemic rape, colonization, chattel slavery. They did not leave Europe and once they landed on the shores of the New World, all of a sudden discover these new skills and techniques. They had refined and perfected those skills in Europe before they ever left Europe. So we think that their appetite for oppression, destruction, mutilation, murder is somehow was provoked when they saw our skin. And we keep carrying that burden. And, oh, I feel bad. I'm pessimistic. Oh, because I'm black. Oh, they did it because I'm black. They ain't done shit to you because you black. They freaking were lynching white women for sport. It'd be a slow weekend in the Shire, and they'd be like, oh, she's a witch. I'm going to accuse somebody of being a witch because we drinking, singing, and dancing, and want to top the night off to find an elderly white woman to mutilate, ritually murder, and set aflame. And you look at those old medieval paintings of witch burnings, and you look at the photos of lynchings, and you look at the photos coming out of Abu Ghraib. This is a consistent history and behavior, all the way back to Jesus on the cross, up to Brother Chapo Jones on the stake here in the South. And then in the South, they hung us from trees, and in the North, they hung us from light posts. Like Malcolm X said, if you're south of the Canadian border, you south. This is a pathology that some of their own people, from Dr. Tom Hartman to Derek Jensen, going back to Sigmund Freud, that their own people looked at their own death urge, their own hyper-aggressive, murderous, horrendous culture. And even if they hate black folks, what the fuck did the polar bears do to them? What did polar bears do to them? You have people all over the world that existed with apex predators. And they come and in a short amount of time, wiping everything out. And we think it's Afro-Pessimism, it's polar bear pessimism.
Yeah.
Is it passenger pigeon pessimism? This culture is killing everything. Nothing is surviving. Groundhogs, phytoplankton, coral reefs, nothing is surviving this culture, and black people sitting around like, it's because of my skin. For the Lord. No, I'm sorry, black folks. If every one of us woke up tomorrow with the Michael Jackson makeover, white skin and beautiful white skin, and we all, our children turn to little white kids, I'm telling you, the violence, the ecocide, the hyper exploitation, appropriation of funds, it would not end. And in fact, it would probably intensify if it was nothing but white folks left. This is not a black problem. It is, we are not to blame. but we are responsible for correcting it. We are responsible for resetting and rebalancing the earth, but we are not to blame for this. It's not our black skin that sent these people into a frenzy.
It's very interesting that you say that, and in fact, and just and still thinking about settler colonialism. It's interesting that you say that, because England colonized Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. In fact, the model of settler colonialism, which when we think of settler colonialism, we think of the oppression of Native Americans in the United States, Indigenous Canadians in Canada, the Aboriginal people of Australia, the Maori of New Zealand, and to an extent the Sami people. But that whole model of settler colonialism actually started when England colonized, Ireland. Right. So
yeah, and then the Irish came to the United States,
and then not only that, but there is a kind of white on white racism when it comes to Western Europe against Eastern Europe, and yeah, so a lot of that, so yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of that dynamic does exist. So even when it comes to Western imperialism, they don't just target left-wing governments of Latin America or Africa. They even will target center-right governments in Eastern Europe, even though they're so yeah. Anyways, it's just interesting what you were.
Yeah, I think we carry in this
wrong. And the ongoing pathological hatred of like all things Russia. That just goes to show you, like when whites, when
the United States is divided on Russia. The right wing, the Republicans now idolize Russia. Now, there's a faction of the political right that idolize Russia. And there's a faction of political liberal centrists. The neoliberals have animosity for Russia, but the neocons idealize Russia now, and it could sway back and forth. Right. Yeah. The people who used to hate Russia, the communists, the red, better dead than red, now those people love Russia because now Russia is a right-wing reactionary authoritarian government. So they want to bring what Russia has here.
But that's a funny contradiction in and of itself, in that, okay, like the West, eradicated communism and Eastern Europe. So you would think that like that far right parties, it could be the Liberal Party of Australia, both the Republicans and Democrats to a certain extent, or even the Tory parties, you would think that they would love Russia now. But of course, because Putin is not their SOB, they have to, have this, this ridiculous ongoing,
Listen, that's the thing about these people never get. I mean, during 9/11, when George Bush wanted to carry out his genocidal murder orgy called the War on Terror, remember Germany was giving pushback, and so German went from, people want to drive German cars and being in German engineering and their great admiration of the structure and order of German society. And now you couldn't even call it sauerkraut. We started calling sauerkraut freedom cabbage. And when the French gave pushback, we called them freedom fries, no longer French fries. So these people are high-tech barbarians. There is no order or consistency in that unity. And that is the thing. They come and have us to believe that our ancestors were primitive, that our governing structures and our traditions were primitive, and they are just more chaotic and primitive and uneven. The only reason they're able to mask their incompetence is because they literally have access to the wealth of the world. So whenever there is some great collapse, some great calamity or disruption caused by their own barbarism or incompetence, they're able to just literally print money to fix it.
Yeah.
So the only thing that is sustaining the United States is the United States' capacity to kill and make other people shit. The only reason that Western Europe is able to sustain itself is because it has a monopoly on violence and a monopoly on theft. They're able to steal. If every other country was in that position to say, hey, well, if you have an African incompetent or corrupt government, if you have a Caribbean or Latin American or Asian government that functions the same way, say, oops, we've collapsed the global housing market, we've collapsed the commodities market, we've gotten into foreign entanglements, and we've overstressed our military. Let's just print a whole bunch of money and go to people and say, hey, this paper has this type of value. And if you don't accept the value and reality of this paper, we will kill you. We will invade your country and replace the leadership. So that's the only thing that is allowed to mask how dysfunctional the whole world is. Capitalism does not work. It is not sustainable. And it is as much honesty as the fiat currency that it is rooted in. But many of us have been indoctrinated from birth through both the carrot of one day you can get rich, one day you can enjoy the spoils of capitalism, and the stick of we will incarcerate or kill you. So carrot and the stick is this system of high-tech barbarism. No more than we sit back and look at the monarchical system and see one man sitting on the throne running the whole society, and the knights out, who we are taught that the knights are out protecting people when they were pillaging and raping in the commoners building, and they go work the fields all day and then go work to build the cathedral and go work to build the keep, when they're doing all the work and have no power and no resources. And now in this modern system, like, well, we're not governed by kings, we're governed by congresses, by legislatures, and they're not wearing crowns, they're wearing suits. So now we really think we're in a more sophisticated position than the peasants. You know, when in reality, we should all, there's enough resources produced by the collective labor for all of us to live well. But we think profit is something that brilliant people are able to pull out of the sky, when profit is nothing more than our stolen wealth. And we think we admire people who are create profit, instead of having the outrage to understand that, hey, Jeff Bezos is a goddamn parasite. He don't package, he don't manufacture, he don't deliver, but he gets the lion's share off the top. And we've been convinced that this is rational. So I'm more concerned about irrationality than pessimism.
Fantastic response. And wow, I wasn't even planning on us talking so much about, Afro-Pessimism and also white on white.
I'm sorry, I'll try to stay on topic.
But it's brilliant. And
I don't want to mess up your show. Everybody hates my show.
No.
I don't I don't want to bring you down.
No, it's all good. It's a subject we definitely have to return to. But thank you for the response there, and it's a lot to ponder about. So then I have to ask this question, which is, what is the so I have to ask this question, which is, what is the state in the quest for racial social justice? Are a lot of the Black liberation groups, Black Lives Matter groups and organizers, that you work with or that you come across, demanding an end to the drug war, repealing the Clinton crime bill, broken windows theory, and ending the three-strike laws? And if many aren't, and if many aren't, and if most, yes, and if most aren't advocating for ending the drug war, why do you think why do you think that is, given the findings of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow? And why do you think more people also aren't campaigning on constitutional reforms, like closing the loophole of the 13th Amendment, which which clearly says that if you're convicted of a crime, you're a slave to the state? I'm curious your response on that.
Well, first of all, the drug war is over and drugs won. I think drugs need to do their victory lap. The drug war has been ended. Have a winner, won. So congratulations, drugs. As far as people working on the 13th Amendment, let me tell you something about being an old ass man in the struggle. People are working on everything. There are people out here working on prisoner issues. There are people out here working on addressing and constitutional referendums and amendments to truly abolish slavery, not simply limit slavery to the U.S. penal system, but because of the way that this society and information and access to information is structured, there's a lot of people working in obscurity and unknown. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you one injustice that doesn't have some organization or groups of individuals that are trying to confront, but we don't get access to that because the media in the West and the internet, we think we live in the information age, but if you can't get that algorithm popping. So when people think about Black struggle, or even if you go Google Pan-Africanism, Dr. Umar's going to pop up, or some other caricature of pro-Blackness or caricature of Black struggle. So I don't think that we could ever be in a position. I mean, I know people here on the streets of Chicago, and they always talk about when the police murder or atrocities against the Black community, and the Black community has a rebellion or uprising or an outcry. People are like, well, why don't they protest when Black people kill each other? And that just shows Tom's cocoon handkerchief head. Tom. But and they ignore right now, or what I call it, atrocity hopping. You know, right now today, there are Black people in the streets working on internalized violence. You know, gang predation, and there are people on that right now. But people don't acknowledge and don't give a shit until there's some type of boiling over, and the oppressors have figured out, the elites have figured out that resistance is a fix. It's going to always come. If you have exploitation, it's free resistance. If a shaggy dog, that dog, old mutt, and that mutt has to read Marx, that mutt does make a protest sign, that mutt does not have to have a Black Power fist and a green beret. If you take a dog and kick it and kick it and kick it every day, eventually that dog is going to form some form of resistance. That is just the nature that popular video going around showing that would have two caged monkeys, and they give one monkey, they'd have the monkey perform a task. They have a monkey perform a task, and when one monkey performed the task, he'd get a grape. And when another monkey performed the task, he gets a sunflower seed. And the grape monkey was like, okay, let's do this. And the seed monkey was like, yo, this shit ain't fair. So fairness, where Bill Gates' famous quote, life isn't fair. And I'm not going to get off sidetrack, but the thing, if you have children, you'll notice the first thing they learn, the first concept, you ain't got to teach them. That's not fair. That's the first thing. Oh, that's not, especially if you have more than one child in the house. It's not fair. It's not fair. Fairness is an innate. It is evolutionary. We understand fairness and justice to the extent that it takes generations of violence and unyielding, intensive propaganda to get the human brain to accept injustice and unfairness, and to the extent that we have to pretend that the injustice and unfairness is fair. Jeff Bezos deserves this money. Don't look behind the curtain. Jeff Bezos is a brilliant man who made a website. Yes, and then they all earned this.
But that's because of the whole greed is good. Those
they don't even run that shit anymore. Now the people's like, I'm not greedy. I'm just blessed and highly favored. I'm just a hard worker who sacrificed. I'm not greedy. I'm going to fly cars with this money. So even with the greed good thing, that was never really, that was a popular meme. But having come up in the 80s, been around in the Gordon Gekko Wall Street era when everybody was trying to slick back their hair and wear the Miami Vice look, even then, that shit never resonated with the masses. So fairness is something that is inherent. it's biochemical. When we see injustice, even if it doesn't happen to us, if you're watching a movie and the villain, we get a biochemical response. We have an instinctive love of what Kwame Ture said. We have an instinctive love of justice. They have to purge that. They have to warp it. They have to distort it. They have to redirect it. Because our innate qualities, they find that humans who do for other people have longer life expectancies. They have better outlook. They have their body processes sugars and digests food better, where isolation kills us faster. So we are beings that are oriented towards mutual support, mutual cooperation, mutual help. And that was necessary because in our early development, in our earliest evolutions, if you didn't have that quality, the predators would eat you. You know, you'd get eaten. And so if the predator did, in whether we're hunting to eat the mammoth or we're fighting off the saber tooth, if we didn't stand arm in arm, we didn't have the biggest claws. Our greatest assets were our intellect, and our intellect drove us to be social, pro-social. So I don't even know if I'm answering your question. I'm sorry. But what you ask about social justice?
It sounds to me so in Chicago where you're based, so a lot of the racial social justice groups, they are, you know, campaigning to end the drug war, all of the Neo-Dickensian stuff like the Clinton crime bill, the three
everybody's doing laws, everything,
even, right? Even trying to end slavery by closing that loophole in the 13th Amendment. So a lot of people are a lot of people are doing that. It's just you would never know that if you watch CNN or any of those other corporate news outlets,
and the system who they want to give attention,
or even if you watch the best of left-leaning independent nonprofit news outlets, then
right. Well, yeah, every epoch, every historical arc, the oppressors a lot of times will, if they can't suppress a movement or if they can't suppress resistance, they want to capture it and redirect it. You know, people fighting for liberation, and they handpicked leaders to say, hey, instead of violently fighting for liberation, why don't you passively and non-violently fight for integration? You know, Black people, even in the recent Michael Brown, George Floyd era, they were able to turn calls for defunding the police, calls for justice in the streets, blocking highways, and disrupting the economy, and they were able to turn that into opportunities for entrepreneurism. Let's have more Black entrepreneurs and send more Black people into you know what that the whole diversity, equity, inclusion. So more Black people in boardrooms trying to help multinational corporations further economically exploit the. So they always understood that. So a lot of times what we hear about, oh, this is the movement, this is what the people into. There was a very, back in the day, you don't hear it as much. They have grassroots
Diallo. Diallo, if I can interrupt you for 1 second, there seems to be a lot of internet connection problems. I think it's coming from, I think it's coming from your end. But let's try to do this. If you close your camera, do you think try closing your camera and continue to speak, because for some reason like it keeps being choppy for some reason.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. So continue with what you were saying, and hopefully it works better. Than if not, then then maybe we need to conclude and try to continue the conversation another day. So okay, so continue with what you were saying.
Excuse me. Okay. Well, we were talking. Are we still talking about, you know, social justice and the things people are working for? I was speaking to a lot of times you have the true grassroots, which often operates off the radar, And then you have the astroturf. And astroturf is supposed to think and look and replicate the grassroots, but it's artificial and it's not organically bottom up from the community, but it's top down from the status quo. And what they sell, or they try to sell um, liberation or justice as Black people having, or other any oppressed group having, more access and opportunity within systems and institutions of white hegemony and capitalism, as opposed to selling liberation, which is opposition and subversion of white hegemony and capitalism. So it's complex thing, and they know that people are going to be outraged at injustice, and they can direct and capture, and they even commodify and generate profit off of people's outrage.
That's where that's where the whole nonprofit industrial complex comes from, right?
That's one part of it. Yeah, a major part, but yeah, that's a one part of it. And what I just call overall prosperity politics. You know, there's a reactionary movement, AstroTurf movement, the ADOS and Foundational Black America, who have captured the justified cause for liberation, and they've overtaken organs that have been fighting for reparations for decades, like in Cobra, and now they've turned pretty much our fate into saying, hey, Black people need a windfall of fiat currency that will solve all our problems. If we fully align with the agendas, and we fully align with the capitalist and imperialist agenda of the United States, and we're given more capital to invest in and to elevate our status within the system, that's our only solution. Whereas reparation before was about not just getting the due resources that were denied us, but the cessation of the atrocities and injustices that made us worthy of reparations in the first place. But you'll see a lot of prosperity politics, people saying, hey, once we get the money, once we get the windfall, once we get the barrel full of fiat, our problems will be solved.
Unbelievable. And that's a perfect segue to that's a perfect segue to this question, which is, where do you stand on what to do about police where do you stand about what to do about police state terror? Are you for radical reforms like ending many of the regressive Neo-Dickensian laws I mentioned in my previous question, demilitarization of the police and whatnot, or are you for abolishing the police? And do explain why you're in favor of one for the other, and then I have a very good follow-up question to ask after that.
I'm in favor of all that shit. You know,
Okay.
I support all that. Defund, abolish, yeah. But here's the thing about police. You know, throughout, since their founding, going back to the Roman Empire, where the first official police force, the police enforced the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And there are too many people who oppose the police who do not oppose the status quo. You have, and so the police are going to always have an out, because the status quo, you'll notice, I mean, the police are racist. The police are also anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And I lived in New York for many, many years. And I lived just outside of Crown Heights with a large Hasidic Jew population. And those white cops, they didn't like the Jews and they didn't like blacks, but they knew to step lightly when engaging with the Jewish, with the Hasidic, with the Orthodox community. Not because they had less animosity for Jews. If you look at any racist website, if you go to 4chan or 8chan or any place online where the racists gather up to speak free and anonymously, you'll see that there is just as much anti-Semitism as there is anti-Black racism. But when those same cops, you know, log off and put on their uniform and go to work, they don't level the same, because the status quo and where you stand in the status quo, like I told you before, there is a lot of hatred with internal ethnic conflicts. The Jewish, the Irish, the Polish, the Catholics, the Protestants, they have more divisions than we can even have. But who gets preyed upon is less about who the cop hates, and more about who the society gives them permission to prey upon.
So in other words, in other words, black people, indigenous people, Latinx people, the more brown or black you are, it's that's an
Well,
acceptable.
again,
It's more like that's an acceptable form of racism. Ergo, the police are going to unleash a lot of terror on us, whereas white, Jewish, working class people and others, it'll be less lethal. But of course, when workers go on strike, the police are ready to crack skulls amongst their.
well, again, it's but here's the thing: it's never fixed. It's never fixed. I remember my college, the day of the Rodney King rebellion
Yeah.
was the same day as my college orientation. It happened just as the class of '92 was prepared to start college, and I was at State University of New York downstate, prepared to go to a orientation, and I was in downtown Brooklyn, and the black
Downtown
community
Brooklyn.
was outraged, and for
Yeah.
that window of time, the status quo had changed, and cops got the hell out of our way. They did not confront us, and they were very polite. And for a short time after that, they were very light in how they stepped until the status quo, the ultimate status quo reasserted itself. But there was a time where the Mujahideen Muslims in the 80s were looked at as a model minority. They were looked at as a hardworking and noble people, strong family values. Ronald, the racist Reagan, brought the Mujahideen leaders here and said that these are our allies in fighting Islam. And when I sat across from the Mujahideen, if you know who the Mujahideen is, they are the Taliban, the precursors to the Taliban. And he's our founding fathers, and they went from being hardworking, honorable people with strong faith to being predators and terrorists who were targeted by the police. And they would even go into the mosque and spy on the mosque, and they would set them up to commit crimes. And it's the same thing with Latinos. I remember the Latin explosion, and we were all living La Vida Loca and doing the Macarena. And then the Hispanics became illegals, and they speak English and come to our countries. And so nobody, and even Asian people, much of my life, Asians were the model minorities, and now they become disease vectors in the streets. In this system, irrational, hyper-aggressive, violent system that feeds and thrives off of atrocity. And what happens is this system is so unstable, it's so dangerous that when any person from any group finds any level of relief, like I say black wealth is a ransom. Black people get education and wealth, not just because it's their aspiration, but they believe it will make them immune or exempt from the worst ravages of white aggression. But nobody's safe in this system. That's the thing. We're all scrambling for some sanctuary within a system that really affords no one sanctuary. And if it doesn't get you economically, it gets you psychologically. If it doesn't get you psychologically, it gets you socially. It is not a sustainable system. But because Mayweather gets to fly around in a private jet, and we all get to live vicariously through Mayweather's private jet, the system is sustained. But it's not even sustained, because if you look at, again, the timeline of human civilization and history, this is not only the most volatile, it is one of the most short-lived. It's already showing signs of decay and collapse. But the problem with this system is the way it has developed and the technology available to the elites and the psychopaths who control this system has, unlike the fall of the Roman Empire, unlike the fall of the Mongol Empire, unlike the fall of the other imperialist powers, this particular collapse has the potential to destroy the planet's ecosystem as we know it, and destroy the sustaining capacity of the Earth. That's the most unique and dangerous thing about this particular unsustainable, unjust, and doomed system.
But when it comes to the issue of the of the police, whether it's radically reforming and restructuring the police or simply abolishing them. But of course, to abolish the police, it has to be a humongous process. Talking to the abolitionists, I know they all say that like there's no way we can get rid of the police tomorrow and have a very and have it safe.
That's not true. I disagree with that. Evidence.
Okay. Then actually,
does not support that conclusion.
Okay, actually, then do counter that before I get before I get to the point.
Let's look at if you know anything about the U.S. prison system. U.S. prisons are a microcosm of the larger society, where you still have the haves and have-nots, you have the racial stripes and the hierarchies. If you look at the Attica uprisings, in most places where the inmates take over the prisons or the asylums, they actually create less predatory and violent situations. In Attica, the guards do not police, like in Chicago, the police do not stop crime or prevent crime. They wrangle crime. There are certain areas in this city, and my community is one of them, where the police allow for a certain level of crime in order to contain it. And they push crime out, and during certain uprisings, the previous scumbag Uncle Tom Handkerchief Head coon ass mayor would literally lift bridges, and she was shunting the protesters into the Black community when they were trying to go into affluent areas, which was the source of the injustice, the source of the economic exploitation, and they exploited. So cops do not make us safer. My neighborhood is one of the most heavily policed neighborhoods in the community. Mm-hmm. And it's also one of the most violent. So if people woke up tomorrow and there were no police, because again, what do the police do? The police defend the status quo. What is the status quo? Status quo is imbalance, injustice, exploitation, and severe inequality in terms of the distribution and access to resources. The cops help maintain that. What drives violence? What drives exploitation? What prevents us from going up to Bezos and these other predatory and parasitic billionaires to get our shit back? It's the cops. So I disagree. There have been places in the city where the cops have gone protesting. I was in New York in the 90s under Mayor David Dinkins, and there was a police strike. And the city did descend into chaos when the police said, we're done policing. And in fact, I think that the Chicago Police Department, they did not want Mayor Brandon Johnson elected. And they said if Mayor Brandon Johnson is elected, there will be blood in the streets. And I don't think that's because they were going to step back from policing, but because they were going to intensify their policing to cause the blood in the streets.
Interesting. Wow. That's unbelievable. But then, but then I have to ask this. But then, okay, long-term wise, if we really do think we can achieve a world without the police and without them even being unnecessary and without them also being and without them being a necessary evil, are you in favor then of community control over the police, which the efforts to do that, a big movement calling for that is actually in in Chicago, right?
Never part of what happens is what they call agency capture. What they've always found when they have civilian oversight or so-called community control of the police, the people who get on those panels or boards, who asked me to work on campaign to get on the civilian policing board. And as we were building the campaign, his opponent got out of the way, so we didn't. He basically walked in. Is that individuals begin to identify with the police? What they have found in the cities that have implemented this years ago, decades ago, those people go from seeing themselves as representatives of the community and devolve into seeing themselves as defenders and protectors of the police. So you community Klansmen, community Nazis, like just slapping community onto something fix it. If it's a bad thing, it's a bad thing. Police are inherently bad. The thing is a good cop. And my uncle, I have five.
Actually,
My favorite uncle.
Diallo, wait one moment because there was a bit of a choppiness again going on when you were speaking. So if I understood correctly,
sorry.
So if I understood correctly, so even community control over the police, which the late Glenn Ford was a big advocate of, and which there was a big movement in Chicago for that. So you were involved in that noble effort of radically reforming the police. But when that happened, basically, but when that happened, some opportunists co-opted it, took control over it, and basically, it just and basically community control over the police. In other words, it simply didn't advance. If I understood that correctly, right?
First of all, there is no community control of the police. These agencies have no enforcement power. They cannot fire cops. They cannot incarcerate cops. They have no control over the police budget. They have no control over the police payout and benefits. What the hell is community control of the police? Basically, these people get together in a room and look over all the crimes and atrocities that the cops have committed against the community, and then they write up recommendations and then send it off to whoever. I mean, I want community control over the community. I want community control over the resources. I want community control over the local economy. That would do more to quell the predation of the cops than community control over the police. Community control over the police is like $15 an hour. It is something we've put a lot of energy into, but the historical record, the evidence shows that it is pretty much an exercise in futility. Now, people in my own community, like I said, I had a good brother who's a good organizer and a very sincere and committed person contact me and say, hey, brother, I want you to come work on my campaign so I can get on the community control board. But ultimately, this is where I have to earn my status, I guess, as the rich of Pan-Africanism. I can't act like reality isn't real. And if you want so-called community control over the police, control of the budget. And whenever the police commit atrocities, take the funds, make every cop get personal liability insurance. That would do more than community control. If you crack somebody's head, if you do an illegal chokehold, if you breach somebody's privacy or breach someone's property without following the proper protocols, you will be hit. And you will pay out of your pocket or out of the benevolent association fund or out of the police budget. In the last less than a decade, last 8 years, we've paid almost $500 million in penalties out to litigation because of police atrocities, and the money came from the very people who are targeted by the police. We like to play games, and all these reforms come down and these new titles and these new practices, and we want to demilitarize the police, and we ignore the fact that cops, when they just had a 38 revolver and a wooden bill, were still killing us. Oh, we demilitarized the police, and we just had a bunch of pigs beat a man to death with their bare hands, as if the cops need military-grade weapons in order to commit atrocities. They were doing it with 38 revolvers and wooden billy clubs. So these surface.
So it sounds to me, if I understand you correctly, is yes, we should be fighting for all of those things: ending broken windows theory, ending three-strike laws, ending ending the drug war. We should have real community control over the police. So we should be fighting for all of that. But in the end of the day, that's all. It's all, I guess, sort of like band-aids on the broken system. So we should just be real with ourselves and with our people power movements and say we need to abolish the police. How we get there, we can all
need to abolish.
Things, but
we need to abolish capitalism. If you abolish police and leave capitalism in place, we need to abolish capitalism and white hegemony. Not simply reform or restructure or abolish components of it.
Yeah.
But if you want to, like I said, if you want to do reforms and work with underneath that, you're going to advocate for reforms or negotiate or vote or protest, at the very least, if it's restructured, how police are penalized for their atrocities, that will go a further way than a group of citizens review atrocities. Now, I'm not against civilian oversight in terms of collecting data, and because I think information is necessary. We got to have correct information and data in order to come up with viable solutions. So then that these community oversight and community control boards have access to a certain amount of police records and police and data that is not commonly available, I think they can be an asset. But in terms of being able to stop the predation of the police don't enforce laws. They enforce the status quo. And if you are talking to police without upending the status quo, we're what I call atrocity hopping. We're jumping from one atrocity to the next. And for every atrocity we get on top of, there's several behind us and several in front of us that are going on.
That's fascinating response. And actually, I'm gonna Mr. Kenyatta, you can put your video on. I'm almost done with my questions.
I didn't got comfortable. I didn't took my shirt off and put my feet up. I didn't know he was going back on camera. Let me get dressed. Stop playing.
Well, I had a. I'm gonna save this question for another time. But so I have to ask this question. This is going to be my second to last question, which is, while we're talking about, all this, so while we're talking about, I think you said it perfectly. If we want to stop police terror, we need to stop capitalism. So then I have to ask this question, which is, are any of the racial social justice groups that you work with, or that you talk to, or that you come across in Chicago, in Chicago, who talk about defunding the police, abolishing the police, and whatnot? Are a lot of them also have a lot of them also been talking about the need also to abolish the CIA, the NSA, and the U.S. military? And if the answer to that is no, why do you think? Why do you think that is?
Well, the ones that I'm most familiar with boots on the ground, they kind of I think that they don't deal with that on a day-to-day basis, simply because it's really just not really practical. And I think they rightfully conclude that if they expanded too much from their mandate to deal with local policing atrocities, it would so dilute their efforts that they would kind of lose. So most of the people that I see working on this police issue, they tend to work, it's a local issue for most people. And so they work on, the local police, the PD, the state troopers, and other local policing agencies. And they also work with on gangs and interrupting violence and alternatives, mental health things, and to go to the feds or go to international, because the CIA is not even supposed to be operating inside the country, even though they're all connected. And I know these people understand the connection. It's just the mandate is too broad. I think they would need a lot more resources and funding in order to have such a broad mandate. So I do see the people just to pull out like Code Pink or Friends of the Congo. Those organizations deal with the atrocities of the CIA, the coup d'états, and the proxy wars that are. You have organizations that tend, like I said, Friends of the Congo and Code Pink, that deal with the international atrocities and the nationwide federal policing agencies and intelligence agencies. But you'll notice they don't really speak to the local police. It's just, I would love to see a organization movement that was broad enough to deal with them all under the same umbrella, but it just tends to be with the level of support and the level of engagement. I think it would be, even if I was working on one, even if I begin to work directly, I would choose one or the other. Now we can go on to speak about and educate. And what I would do is say, hey, these are the various issues. So where you gonna go? But if you try to do it all, I just don't even think, as Gil Scott Heron said, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So I think it's just practicality and structure that kind of limits that.
Sounds to me as
not that they're ignorant of it, not that they don't value the work. It's just ain't nobody got time for that. Anybody got, the resources aren't there to build that off.
Sounds to me as if the Black is Back Coalition and Black Alliance for Peace then needs to step its game up then. And
give them some money. You got money? Where the money reside? Give them a $50,000 or a $1 million grant, and I guarantee you they'd be on it to the great degree. Not to say they're already doing the work. If you can go out and get them 75 recruits, maybe pay rent on their facilities, maybe buy some laptops. I mean, shoot, if you got the resources, if you sitting on, you in Belgium, ain't you? If you got access to some of that gold they stole from the Congo,
I wish. I wish. Well, if I was a rich Negro, I would happily shower.
Listen. I'm a hater too. I'm criticizing and tearing other things down, but if you're gonna level that type of criticism, you better come with to make it happen. Because these Black Alliance for Peace, from my point of view, the All African People's Revolutionary, they're doing quite a bit with what resources they have. You want something of that scale, you need Black Lives Matter. You better get George Soros' number. Apparently, according to right wing, he's funding all the Black militancy. Somebody holler at me, George. I ain't got none. But where's my Soros check? I'm a leftist.
Well,
I'm a leftist. American. Where's anti-American cultural Marxist Soros check? God damn it.
Well, but of course you who keep talking about capital,
and I got to deal with. I got to live here. I got to deal with you out here calling names of I be seeing in the streets. Don't do that. I was like, wait, yeah, your dude said we need to step up. It's like, I didn't say it. I didn't say that.
In all respects to BAP and of course the Black is Back Coalition. But of course,
if I was I'd be talking, but I'd be having people I talk about. But if I was in, ain't no telling what. I could go to some place, I'd be eating all the balls and on that Congolese gold they stole. No bastards.
Yeah, but of course, George Soros is not going to shower. Is not going to shower BAP, the Black is Back Coalition, or even yourself because of all that
anti-capitalism funding all the left. Nobody ever tell how to get into that.
Can you repeat that again?
I heard that leftist.
Actually, Diallo, let's close the camera again because I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Off. Okay, I'm getting again. Sorry, ladies. Camera off. Shoes off.
Okay, so. Hold on, folks. We're having some internet problems. We'll be right back.